so much, our viewers. And today we are starting another podcast, first with Professor Saleemul Huq. And this is a podcast or a series for International Environment Day or World Environment Day to say. And we have been talking about issues. We saw the IPCC report that was released in February 28th that talks about loss and damage. And I believe that climate finance is needed for us to be able to prevent further loss and damage and for us to be able to build back better sustainable finance and all. And so he has played quite a number of roles, even at various COPs, and is also playing a role even with his organization and those he heads. So looking at issues that happens in vulnerable communities in Africa, in Asia, around the globe, how climate change is leading to loss and damage, and some of this damage cannot be restored, just like our natural heritage and cultural heritage. So it's going to be telling us more about what we need to know about this loss and damage and how we need to finance them and what is needed for us as individuals, as governments to take as a call of action. So thank you so much for coming. So can you briefly introduce yourself? Thank you.
Sure. Thank you very much, Oladosu, for inviting me. So my name is Saleemul Huq. I'm a professor at the Independent University Bangladesh in Dhaka, Bangladesh, where I am now. And I also head a research center at the university. It's called the International Center for Climate Change and Development. And we do a lot of training and capacity building on climate change, particularly adaptation to climate change for vulnerable countries, including many countries in Africa. We do a lot of work in Africa as well. I have over the years been a lead author on the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the 3rd, 4th, and 5th assessments on adaptation. And I've also been participating in the annual Conference of Parties. I've been one of the few people who's been to all 26 Conference of Parties that have been held so far. But I don't go as a negotiator, I go as an advisor to the least developed countries, which is a group of vulnerable countries, 47 of them, most of them in sub-Saharan Africa, and I advise them on the topics of adaptation and now specifically on loss and damage, which is becoming a big issue for the vulnerable countries. So that's what I do, and I'm very happy to have this opportunity to talk to you.
Thank you so much. You do quite a number of things, and it's really a workload, when you're trying to do different kind of things. All what we are trying to do is to contribute to see that we're able to solve the climate change crisis. And you mentioned advising least developed country or countries that are most vulnerable to climate change crisis, of which you just mentioned that you are one of those few people that have attended all the COP26. That makes it amazing for me. And I want to ask that so far, all these COP26, what are the major outcomes? Why are we not seeing outcomes of these people implementing this? Because COP26 has started as far back as when I was born. So, and now I'm grown up and I'm even a graduate. And so I'm wondering that all of these solutions that have come up from this or ideas or commitments, how far has it gone? We are now shifting to loss and damage, and maybe in the nearest century, definitely climate security and peace issue will become the talk of the issue in COP26 or the next COP. So what do you think in that area? I just want to ask you.
Sure. So let me start by giving you the magnitude of the problem and the challenge in order for you to understand why we have not met it. The magnitude of the challenge is a global change in the atmosphere of a nature that we have never seen before. Okay, it's unprecedented, it's global, it's going to affect everybody on the planet. Now, to a global government is the United Nations. And the United Nations has to work by consensus. There are nearly nations. And to their credit, they did come together and they formed a treaty. They agreed a treaty called the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. They recognized the problem. They said they must take actions. They promised to take action. But then when they went home, they didn't do everything that they promised to do. And then they come back every year for the COP, and we review progress, and we see not much progress. And we have been moving forward in fits and starts. We had at the third conference of parties something called the Kyoto Protocol, which was a good protocol, but then that didn't work. And then the latest good outcome was at the 21st Conference of Parties in 2015 in Paris, France, where we had a big breakthrough. We have an agreement. It's called the Paris Agreement. All countries have agreed to it. For a while, the United States under President Trump withdrew, but the United States under President Biden has come back. So the Paris Agreement is a big breakthrough. We've all agreed what we have to do. We have to keep temperature below 1.5 degrees. We have to do funding for adaptation. The rich countries have promised $100 billion a year to the poor countries to tackle climate change, both mitigation and adaptation. However, even after we promise to do it, we are not doing everything we promised to do. All the countries. And in COP26 in Glasgow, which was the last COP we had, they all came together. They recognized they're not doing enough. They promised to do more, but unfortunately, the actual commitment of doing things is lagging behind the promises. Promises are being made, but implementation of the promises are not taking place. And so we have to continue to be vigilant, all of us. There is a role for us all to play, and we need to play our role, whoever we are, wherever we are. And those of us who live in the vulnerable countries have a particular responsibility in our own countries to make our own citizens aware of the problem and to prepare themselves for it. Initially, it was adaptation to climate change, because climate change was something that would happen in the future. We had to be ready for it. But unfortunately, now with the sixth assessment report of the IPCC published, we are already in what I call the era of loss and damage. It's happening already, not something that will happen. It's already happening. And so we have to deal with both loss and damage and adaptation at the same time in every single country, particularly the poorer countries, particularly in Africa, but also all countries. In every country, they are going to be affected by the impacts of climate change, rich and poor alike. And so we all need to be better prepared. And the final point I'll make is that the next conference of parties, COP27, will be held in November this year, 2022, on the continent of Africa. It's an African COP. It's going to be hosted by Egypt in Sharm el-Sheikh in Egypt. And so this is an opportunity for the African countries to make sure that their agenda is first and foremost in COP27, which did not happen, unfortunately, in COP26 under the British hosting. The Brits they listened to us, but they didn't do anything that we asked them to do, all right? We hope the Egyptians will be different. And it's an African COP. They have said it's an African COP. So we must make sure that the Egyptian hosts of COP27 do a better job than the British host of COP26 did last November in Glasgow.
Yeah, sure. Thank you so much. That COP27 is an African COP. But then I think the Western people shouldn't just make it to just look like we should be the one doing what we should do. Like, we need more commitment, because since it is an African COP, we want to see more of their support beyond words, beyond commitment, because at COP26 there were several commitments, and I believe that by now, before COP27, most of this commitment should have been met. That is what usually leads to us compiling commitments year in, year out, because it's not about the commitment, but it's all about we trying to make those commitments to become a reality. That is what makes us to make progress faster on climate action. And also, you said you're an advisor on climate adaptation, then on loss and damage. And I saw you playing a great role at COP26 when it comes to loss and damage. Please, can you tell us more? And looking at this just released IPCC report in February 28th, what do you want us to know about it? Because I know climate change is a global reality. Africans are not left behind. And so what did you want us to know about those issues of loss and damage that are key, that people doesn't know behind the scene?
Absolutely, great question. So let me start with the issue of adaptation to climate change. Okay, this is something that we've known for some years. The developing countries are trying to develop national adaptation plans. All countries are doing them now. The IPCC report has made a very big issue of adaptation, the need to redouble our efforts on adaptation because we're not doing enough. Every country is not doing enough. We need to do a lot more. And the rich countries have already promised. In fact, in Paris, as I mentioned, they promised to provide $100 billion a year to the developing countries to tackle climate change, both mitigation, reducing greenhouse gas emissions, and also adaptation. Our expectation was that the funding would be half and half for mitigation, half for adaptation. But in practice, firstly, they did not reach 100 billion. Maybe from their own estimates, they reached 79 billion last year, and this year we don't know the figure for. And even in that amount, they spent or they invested 80% for mitigation and only 20% for adaptation. So they are not meeting the commitments they have already made. They promised to give money for adaptation. They did not. They gave a little bit of money. So in COP26 in Glasgow, they acknowledged that. They apologized and they said they will do much better. They are going to double their amount of money for adaptation. Let us see. We must make them do that. We must see whether they're doing it, and we must talk to them and make sure that they deliver on it. Then there is a new problem of loss and damage. This is new. This is something they don't want to talk about. In Glasgow, the developing countries, we went with a demand for the creation of what we call the Glasgow Facility for Financing Loss and Damage. New money, separate money to address loss and damage for impacts that are already happening, which you cannot, is beyond adaptation. Once the impact happens, you can't adapt anymore. You just have to deal with the consequences. And so that was our demand. In the end, the rich countries refused our demand. Okay, we did not get it. What they gave us was something called the Glasgow Dialogue on Loss and Damage. So they agreed to talk. They didn't agree to give any money. So we have to push them. We will push them. In COP27, we will say, we want the finance for loss and damage agreed, and we want funding to come in addition to what you already promised on adaptation and did not do. You need to do that, and you need to give additional funding for loss and damage. Now, having said that, there is a very small glimmer of hope that happened in Glasgow, which was not inside the negotiations, but outside. The First Minister of Scotland, Nicola Sturgeon, she was the first world leader to put some money on the table. She put £2 million from the government of Scotland for a new loss and damage fund. She's the first leader to do that. And she challenged other leaders to join. Other leaders have not joined her yet, but we hope that they will. So she is now coming out in support for us, and we hope that she will continue to do that, and other leaders will join her. So we need to keep pushing.
So much for that insights, that perspective that many people doesn't know about. And I think the climate change crisis knows no boundaries. Today it's affecting Africa, Asia, and some countries the most, but it might come to affect the Westerners because through refugee, through migrations and other things, it might become a very big crisis to solve, because I don't know why they are trying to shy away from their responsibility. We had the $100 commitment. Okay, thank you for that link that you just shared. We had the $100 billion commitment that was mentioned in 2009, but was not made. You know, that was what, those are the things that increases the likelihood of loss and damage to climate change crisis, looking at our natural resources and the rest. And so just to ask that, what are the strategies that we need to bring in ahead of COP27 to see that this becomes a success? It doesn't look like we are just talking about it. We want to bring leaders, like we want to make these leaders to see the reason why they need to commit, and they need to make this commitment a reality. Are we trying to bring in coalitions or bring in an intersectional voices, or what's different things are we trying to do that will not be like the normal things that we used to gather together to just talk about it, or rather to see reactions? What are the different dimensions do we want to take to bring in this loss and damage to become a reality, to be funded for finance and all?
Sure. So I'll answer your question with 3 strategies that we have to adopt. And the reason for these is that there is no global government. We cannot force them to do it. They can tell us they're going to do something and then they don't do it. There's no way we're going to go and attack them for not having kept their word. Okay, so all we have is diplomacy. We have to persuade them to do what they said they're going to do. And so we need to do three things. We need to be united amongst ourselves, the vulnerable countries, the developing countries. We need to have a common agenda, which is what we want. This is what we ask for, and we be united. If we are disunited, then they're not going to listen to us. Okay, one country says one thing, another country says another thing. They say, well, we don't know. Okay, so unity in the developing countries. Second point we have to do is we have to reach out beyond political leaders. Okay, so President Biden is obviously the leader of the United States, but he's not alone. The United States is a very big country. There are people in the United States who will listen to us, particularly young people. All right. So we need to reach out to people in the developed world, people, citizens, particularly young people like yourselves, and tell them your leaders are not doing the right thing. Your leaders are coming and making promises and then they don't keep their promises. You must make your leader keep their promise. And so let us get allies in the developed countries who will be on our side. And there are many. They are sympathetic. They agree that their government should do this, government to account, to make sure that they deliver on the promise. And then the third thing is our homework. We have to show that if we get some money, we will use that money well, okay? Simply demanding money, saying we are poor, we are vulnerable, we are being impacted, give us money like beggars is not going to get us money, all right? We have to say we are already doing something ourselves with whatever we have. Show that we are doing something and say if we got more money, we could do a lot more. But we must do ourselves first. We cannot say, I'm not going to do anything until somebody comes to help me. That's not going to work. Okay, so we have a responsibility ourselves to do what we can with what we have, and then ask, demand, seek support from outside. But if we're not helping ourselves, then seeking support from outside is going to fall on deaf ears. They'll say, guy, you don't do anything. We gave you $1 yesterday. You didn't do with that. Why should we give you more dollars?
Yeah, thank you so much. And this comes to the conclusion of our interview. And thank you for that insight. Very, very wonderful insight you have just shared about what we need to do. Because I saw someone that shared a cartoon that was done, one of those cartoons that was displayed in COP26. And it shows that, oh, someone else is burning. And he said, oh, I need water. And this person said, what if I give you this water? How am I sure that you will use it for this fire? You know, exactly. That is the real illustration of what is happening. The trust in fund and the rest of how it's going to be managed or used. And so political will is needed in all of this commitment to see that it becomes a reality. This is a decade of action, and we must back it up with action and not just a talk show. So thank you so much for coming. I really appreciate your presence. And yeah, so to reconnect.
Thank you very much. Time, right? And good luck and stay in touch.
Yeah, sure. Thank you.